Let's get the generic question out of the way. How did you first hear about this project, and what was it that most excited you about it?
I'd heard that the Tom-Toms had sent out, the smoke signals had been that Woody Allen was checking my availability, which caused me some excitement because he's sort of been a bit of a soundtrack to my life since I was pretty young. I mean, through the 70s, when I was failing my exams, I'd go and see a Woody Allen film, or, it was he has a very specific way of operating. This is probably, the script was the first piece of hard copy I'd seen in decades, I think, and I was in Italy. I have a house in Italy, and it had to be driven to my house, and I was the person who handed it to me personally, waited somewhere while I read it. And I'm not a fast reader, and I like to sort of mull on things for a while and maybe take a couple of days. But I was conscious of this person sitting somewhere who needed to get back and who might be judging me for my, the pace in which I was going through it. Anyway, look, to cut a long story short, yeah, I read it. I read it in 5 minutes. Right. Handed it back and promptly said, no, I don't.
Hamish, can I ask you, you hear these stories about actors being called in for the meeting with Woody Allen, and they often say it's completely not what they expect. It's a very unique situation. Can you explain what your experience meeting him for the first time was?
Yeah, I asked, what's the material? What's the character? What do we know? I know it's shrouded in secrecy. And they were like, well, we're not sure. We think your character is like a homebody. Maybe he's a lumberjack. I was like, so I should wear plaid. They were like, yeah, definitely go with plaid. So I didn't shave. I wore my plaid to the meeting. And Woody, I waited in this dark room, and then I had my, my classical monologue ready, my contemporary comic monologue ready. There was no materials, but I assumed he would want to see something. And he walked in, and he was like, "So we're interested in you for this movie in the south of France that's set in the 20s. We understand there might be some trouble with your schedule." I said, "No trouble at all, sir." "Well, then we'll see you there." And he walked out. And so I burnt my plaid, fired my representation, and got to France fast.
Now, my understanding is that Woody doesn't really do rehearsal. Is that right? So you guys, were you just sort of thrown right into the deep end together? Was it kind of a intimidating thing to go to work for somebody who's been making such great movies for so long? Colin?
Well, I mean, I'm just still reeling from the fact that he got a meeting. I'm actually finding out everybody got a meeting. Apparently Emma got a meeting. It was terrifying. Some of us got to France before he did. He sort of parachuted in, and we'd been there for 3 or 4 days, sort of freaking out in harmony, and fear brings people together, and I think we formed that made us quite a tight group. But we were guessing, and it's like a lot of his films. It's dialogue based and quite heavy with dialogue, and the idea that, because I'd heard all these things about him, and all sorts of things get said, and one of them was, he doesn't direct. He doesn't rehearse, he doesn't direct, and he's very retiring. Don't expect him ever to be funny. And well, it's true he doesn't rehearse. I mean, the first crack at the lines that I had were in front of a rolling camera. I mean, it was action. That was the first word he said to me, really. And
and then it's like, cut. Nice to meet you. I'm Woody.
Oh, you got nice to meet you?
Well,
No, it's he's personable and polite in an incredibly shy way, and I was cautious about whether to even ask questions. But what was not true was that he doesn't direct, because fairly, 3 minutes after the word action was the word cut, and then a barrage of notes and information about what was wrong with what we'd just done. And then, after about the 30th take, he sort of felt he had a couple of prints he could work with, which were, the whole scene was reshot on the last day. And then it did not make the final cut of this movie. And that was true of the whole first day. But he did direct. He directed meticulously, and he was incredibly involved. And I was really surprised, because I'd braced myself for all this stuff about who you don't expect to hear from him. And I was terrified, because I had all this stuff to say. And I thought, if we don't rehearse and he doesn't direct, I've got my, it's all homework, I mean, my only interaction with him on a personal level was as he was directing. There's not a lot of chit chat. Did he ever talk to you?
Oh God, we talked for a while. I got to say that was one of the longest brunches I've ever had in France. So many stories.
Well, but Hamish, is there, in all seriousness though, was there one piece of direction or guidance or anything that he gave that was particularly helpful to both of you, starting with Hamish? I mean, was there any?
I'll tell you this. He said to me, he was like, well, now, I mean, after my first 2 takes, he was like, well, we have 2 your way, and you might be right, and I might be wrong, but let's try one where it seems like you like her, and there's just with a scintilla of romance. Just you actually like her. Okay, let's try it. I mean, that was just my impression when I wrote it. I might be wrong again. So, I found him dead charming and borderline flirty, frankly, the way he gave direction, and I really liked it a lot. Yeah.
I remember years ago when I was contemplating playing a role that was incredibly unsympathetic, one of the people who knew me best said, "You are so really like that. It would be a wonderful opportunity for you just to take off any mask you have and just to be as unpleasant as you really are. You should go for it." And it was like that with this. One of the notes, because Woody Allen's vocabulary is quite extraordinary. I mean, nobody else has ever said, "Now I want you to do a take expressing excessive contumely." And no one has used that word in my life. If in fact, had I not played Hamlet as a student, I wouldn't even have heard it, I don't think. And I had to think for a second what he was asking for. But I mean, basically it was that. Just give yourself up to being an asshole. And it's wonderfully liberating. Trying to win people over is difficult. It puts pressure, because all your supposed assets are being called on. And if no one's really that sure they have any. And so to say, no, throw that out of the window, it's okay if they hate you, is wonderful. Right. The other bit of word, which I hadn't ever heard from a director before, but I suddenly kind of, it spiraled into a kind of retrospective of my entire career, which he just came up after a take and said, "That was somnambulistic." And I was so unfamiliar with the use of the word that for a moment I was hoping it was a compliment.